Hi, Cristina.
Hi, Gabby.
Right, thank you for the lovely, lovely session. Thank you for reminding us that we are imperfect creatures. Did you say 80% of what we learn is lost within 24 hours? And we need 5 to 20 encounters to actually remember new words. This is fascinating, isn't it?
It's very scary.
Yeah, it is actually. It is very scary, but it is fascinating at the same time because, we never think about it, right? Like this. We never think about the 80% that we forget. So it's kind of very, very important that we have this awareness. Now, where do we start, Cristina? Because I have my questions, but I really feel that there's been something interesting going on in the chat. So let's start with your questions. There's something that I think, Cristina, we have to address first. And I mean, young learners, adults, okay? So early years, and let's talk about the different types of activities, whether there are different types of activities, recycling activities at all. And Neil has noted in the chat that most of these activities actually work across a wide range of ages, right?
Yeah.
So what do you have to say to this? Because there was this...
I completely agree. I mean, it does depend on cultural differences. This is something that we need to address first and foremost. I work mainly in the Middle East. I've worked in in Asia, also South Asia. And it is true that some of the activities that I have explained, some people might feel a bit, well, it is for early years because it involves movements, it involves, an element of play, but gamification is actually a great way to learn, and it shouldn't just be targeting the early years. Why? It's because I've taught adult classes a lot, and especially the evening shift, the one from 5 to 7, 7 to 9, where the people are coming home, they're coming straight from work exhausted. And my experience has been that you have to have an element of gamification. You have to have an element of movement, even though it does look like early years, but you have to, otherwise people will fall asleep. They've just worked for 8 hours. You need to get them going. You need to shift their mind also. So that's also something that's interesting.
Mm-hmm. I can see, thank you very much, Cristina, and obviously I agree with you 100%, so I have nothing to add to this, but I can see that Neil would like to, he'd like to comment as well. Neil.
Hi there, can I just check that you can hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear.
Fantastic. First of all, can I just thank you, Cristina, for an absolutely superb session. And as I said, I think in chat, what I really like about it is that it is underpinned by an evidence base, but that you've really provided us with a rich range of activities, which I genuinely believe, from my personal experience, do work at a range of levels. I think coming back to Sheister's comment is the one about age, that there will probably be a relationship between the cognitive complexity of the activity and the age range. So a drawing activity to check understanding of the lexis might well be more appropriate at a lower age range. So you might be working with dog, cat, hen, whatever the animals are, and the students then draw them, aiding retrieval. Students then can show each other their drawings and then comment on, oh, you've drawn a whatever it is. Whereas perhaps at the higher levels, where you've indicated things like poetry writing, incorporating the target lexis, particularly if it incorporates some kind of phonological rhyming scheme, is obviously going to be out of the reach of the very young learners. But I really think, and there's a question here which, if I might just throw my own ideas on, how do you work on your own vocabulary for appearing in an upcoming IELTS exam? Well, there is no IELTS exam list for vocabulary. It could be anything. But everything that you've talked about today, Cristina, strikes me as being just as appropriate in a not very young learner, but a young learner class from 8 to 80, and would be appropriate for general English as well as exam English. It's the techniques that reinforce the recycling and then the retrieval. So bravo, fantastic session.
Thank you, Neil. No, I completely agree, and especially the lower level. I mean, I agree with the complexity of the cognitive processing. Meaning that some of the activities will be maybe could be done for lower ages, but also lower levels, meaning that when you have, it's all about the cognitive load. When you have to try to recycle vocabulary, you don't want to have to ask the lower level, the beginners, the elementary, and the pre-int. You don't want to have to ask them to produce a lot when all you're trying to do is retrieve. So by lowering the cognitive load of the activity, you're actually making retrieval much easier. So hence the drawing. Especially if you have people that don't feel comfortable with the L2, drawing does help people. It differentiates. So if some people might be better at lower level with drawing, some people might be better with actually saying the word. So I think that's something true for lower ages and for lower levels.
You know what, I was just listening to you, and I thought, because you talked about different ages and also mentioned different levels, and that was one of my questions for you, Cristina, anyway. So because you see, I often feel that when it comes to vocabulary retrieval, and when it comes to remembering and memorizing vocabulary, it's not the matter of how many words we actually remember, as much as which words we remember. So my question here would be, do you think there is also a difference between like low and high level students? Would there be a difference in the way recycling activities are designed? So I just came up with this question, okay? It's not a pre-prepared question. I was just listening to you and I thought, yeah, okay, low levels, high levels, different kind of vocabulary, or perhaps there are some types of words, some types of vocabulary that you think are more challenging for students to remember. So my question is about how the different types of vocabulary and levels, obviously, kind of change the way we design recycling activities. Or maybe there is no relevance. It may be a tricky question though. So Neil, if you have something to chip in here, or anybody for that matter, please do, because it's a really, really tricky question, and I don't know the answer to this question. So I'm just throwing it, here, and I expect kind of everybody to chip in. Low level, high level, and different types of vocabulary, and does it actually the different type of vocabulary, does it change the way we design retrieval, recycling activities or not?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Gabby. Thank you, actually.
Yeah, it's a hard one. As I said, I really feel that this may not even be a relevant question, Cristina. So so forgive me if it's not a relevant question.
No,
but
it is a relevant question. I think For me, I see it more as the level of complexity of the activity. That would be that is what would determine whether an activity would be for lower level or a higher level. Meaning that just because I've taught everything from pre-starters, people that, literally literacy classes, all the way to proficiency classes. And I'm a CELTA trainer, so plus proficiency level. And it doesn't matter. A little game of drawing is always interesting with whatever words. I mean, it's more difficult to get the drawing for cynical than it is for table. So, but it is still an element that is very interesting. So I don't think it's the words that would dictate the choices of activities. I think it's the level of complexity. And I'm coming back to the cognitive load. When you have a lower level, a beginner, they grasp, the ability to, they're already under a very high cognitive load, because meaning they have already a lot going on in their heads, because they're dealing with some language they don't understand. And then you're asking them to do something, an activity that's complex in another language. It's too much. So when you have a lower level, you have to stick to less complex, cognitively complex activities. And when you have a higher level, you can pick and choose. You can go with some that don't require so much cognitive processing, but also some that require higher cognitive processing. So that's how I would see it. Not the word of choices dictate the choices of activities, but the level of the students dictate the level of processing from each activity. And that's how you would choose your activities, if that makes sense, Gabby.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. One other question that I have is recycling vocabulary, but then I have the feeling, and you must agree with me, that there are two kind of different ways of doing it, right? One is at a definition level, right? So most of the activities in your video, the first set of activities, it was all about working at a definition level, right?
Receptive.
So yeah, so definition level, and then how to put it, sentence level, scenario level. So different ways of recycling, right, vocabulary. So, and you did make this difference in your video. So you were talking about active and passive, right, recycling activities. Now, and sorry, because I'm just trying to monitor the chat at the same time.
I'm looking at it.
So Neil is saying that many people argue that concrete nouns are easier. Yeah, so this was exactly what I was kind of getting at. So the different types of words, lower levels, more nouns, and more kind of, tangible or simple, not abstract words, which obviously is easier, I feel, to recycle at a definition level. But then the higher, right, the higher level you are, the higher level teacher you are, then your activities change in a sense, because you shift from a definition level to a sentence level. So recycling vocabulary doesn't really happen at a word level, individual word level, but more collocation level, right?
More at the production level, basically. What we're aiming is that at the beginning, there is a need. When you're at a lower level, you haven't had a lot of exposure to the what do you call that, to the language. Therefore, you haven't seen these words enough in order to be able to go into the production. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't do at lower level production, but what I'm saying is that first work on the receptive knowledge, because there is no there is no learning if there is no production, there's no practice. So this is interesting. You have to do a little bit of receptive, maybe at a lower level, because they don't have that exposure to the language. So it increases the exposure to the language. And until we do extensive reading, in extensive listening in the classes, they won't get that exposure. Well, at a higher level, they got that exposure already. And remember, how do you know a word is when you manage to link existing knowledge to new knowledge, so it creates new pathways. And once you got that exposure to the language and you have created these pathways, then you are able to retrieve them faster and better in order to go for production.
Mm-hmm. Now I can see, thank you, Cristina. I can see Nico is saying that it's important to attach vocabulary to students' interest. Now, this takes me back to the question asked in the chat earlier. How can we remember words? So it's not really about recycling as much as mnemonics maybe, but let's talk about this. So how are we going to answer this question? How can we remember words?
Well, it goes back to what I was just saying. Basically, you need to create, the problem is the working and long-term memory thing. Working memory just allows you 3 to 7 words, which is why, you know, on all training courses, we tell you don't teach more than 3 to 7 words because they'll go out. Okay, so the idea is that you cannot hold a lot in the working memory. You have to make sure that it goes into the long-term memory. How can you do that? How can you learn? That is learning. Well, they have evidence-based teaching and evidence-based learning has shown that basically the only way you can create how to learn a word is to create pathways, connections between what you already know and the new knowledge. And you need to create these. That's what it means to know a word, is getting it from the working memory into the long-term memory. How can you do this? Okay, it gets a bit technical, but it's absolutely fine. So what happens is that once you need to forget it in order to remember it. I know it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but it's true. When you forget it, what happened is that the act of forgetting actually makes it more difficult to retrieve the word in future practice, to know the word. Okay, so the effort required to retrieve the word actually leads to longer term retention. Why? Because it making the material more difficult to bring to mind helps to strengthen its integration with the existing knowledge. So by making them forget the word and asking them to retrieve it later, it creates those, it strengthens those pathways, and this is how you know a word.
Mm-hmm. Thank you this is really fascinating, Cristina. Thank you ever so much. Now, and Nick, no, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Ho Triraj is asking this question: what is the best practice for learners to have sound knowledge on lexis? Now, Neil, maybe it's asking for too much, but I wonder if you may want to come back and talk about pollination now, and the fluency strand. Okay,
so pollination has been around as one of the leading lights in vocabulary studies for, you know, years. The 4 strands, if I remember correctly from something I saw recently, goes back to sort of the operationalization, the implementation of research that goes back to about 27 odd years ago. So the 4 strands are nations' attempt to make sure that vocabulary teachers deal with vocabulary in such a way that in their classes, the learners have the best opportunity to learn it. So there will be an overlap in terms of the kind of retrieval and recycling activity that Cristina has spoken so well about today. But the 4 strands are meaning-focused input, meaning-focused output, language-focused learning, and fluency development. The meaning-focused input and output, I think, is very much what we all do as teachers, but notice that the focus is on meaning, not on form. So meaning-focused input might be the students read a text or they listen to a text and they answer questions to establish their meaning, their understanding of what it's all about, the meaning. The language-focused learning element is what language teachers are really good at doing. They'll take words out of that text. They might ask them to be categorized into nouns, into verbs, positive or negative in terms of connotation, and maybe then look at some of the collocations. The fluency development is the strand that language teachers tend to struggle with most. But this is the way in which the learner can take a word that passes from short-term into long-term memory and then comes out of long-term memory in an easy, fluent way. So, for example, once you've done the recycling activities that Cristina has talked about after 5 minutes, 24 hours, 72 hours, you need to keep working with it. So, with AI, you can actually create a text totally recycling vocabulary that is already known to the learners. There is nothing new in that text that they work with. The students may be involved in a categorizing task where they're given, I don't know, let's take a group of intermediate young adults, teenagers, and they're planning an adventure holiday. And they're given a list of items that they've seen before, or rather they're told, sorry, they're not given a list, they're told you're going on an adventure holiday. What are the 5 items that you would take with you? So that's a retrieval activity. The following day, they then might write an email to their friends telling them about what they packed and why. So we're going over the vocabulary time and time again in different focuses in order to get the students to the point where that vocabulary is ready at their fingertips straight away. Speed reading is another really good way of doing this. The students might reread a text that they'd read previously in order to access meaning of vocabulary for the first time, but this time they are only given half the time to read it and then have a question about what word meant X, what word meant Y, in order to see if they can get the vocabulary productively out of their mouths, having read it. Integrated skills are really good for this as well. So if you're teaching a group of very young learners and they've been learning animals, for example, you might get the students to present their 3 favorite animals from the zoo and why. And this could be as simple as, I like cows, they're white and black. I like horses, they have 4 legs. But anything that encourages the students to use and use and use again in a meaning-focused way, that vocabulary, because it's recycled and it's presented, and the students are required to review it and reuse it and present it fluently, speaks to this movement away from, I've got a word in my head, but I can't quite remember it, to, I know immediately that I'm learning Welsh at the moment, so I know horse is TEFL, crab is cragnog, and so on. That was probably a slightly longer answer than you were expecting, but I hope it
no, lovely, lovely, Neil. Thank you very much. And now I just want to say, Salvatore, I hope Neil has actually answered your question, because I have a note, I've made a note of your question, so we didn't forget about you. Because your question was whether we should recycle the same vocabulary over and over and over again. And I hope Neil has just provided the best answer, right?
I can just add there, Gabby, that the onus, the agency when it comes to recycling is initially initiated by the teacher, but it's the student's responsibility to do it for themselves. Because otherwise the teacher would never introduce any new vocabulary. The students need to take responsibility for part of their learning themselves.
Mm-hmm. Now, Cristina, if you allow me, because my very first question for you, I had no opportunity to ask you, okay, and we only have about 20 minutes left, and actually Neil was already talking about it, so I feel it's the best time for me now to ask you my first question. And the question is about the difference between teaching vocabulary and learning vocabulary. So obviously this is not the same. So planning for teaching vocabulary or planning for learning vocabulary. So back to initial teacher training qualification. Now, what do we actually teach teachers? And is it important to highlight this difference that, you know, teaching vocabulary is a completely different thing from learning vocabulary. And we, just as we plan for teaching, so we plan, you know, all the things like, you know, the context and how to elicit the meaning and whatnot. So this is all taught on initial teacher training courses. We know it, but now planning for learning vocabulary. So never taught on CELTA or TESOL courses. Now, how important do you think the actual concept of planning for learning vocabulary is, and what would we possibly want to include in this?
I mean, I'm trying to remember a long time ago. I think I remember maybe in 2019, there might have been an input session on recycling vocab, but it was one of my, it was a long time ago, and I haven't seen it ever since, and I've been doing a lot of CELTAs. The problem is that with the initial teacher training courses that we provide around the world is that let's admit it, it's a crash course. It's a crash course, and we barely scrap the surface. Some people would even say that we you know, even for when it comes to skills, which Gabby is something that we have discussed, when it comes to skills, we don't actually teach how to how to listen. We just test. We just allow practice of listening on these courses. So what we need to do when we want to really plan for learning the words, it's more long term. We can't just see it on the lesson level. We have to see it as the curriculum level. We have to see when can we insert these recycling activities. And for example, we have to rethink. I know from the CELTA that we always start with a little lead-in. In real class, we start with homework that is based on the homework, on the work from the previous lesson. But that's something we need to shift. And instead of doing the homework on what we learned the previous lesson, no, do homework on what you did 2 weeks ago. Do homework on, so that's recycling. That is really recycling. We have to think about it as long term. The problem, Gabby, is you remember when you said, oh, that's fascinating, the fact that we forget 80% and we have to see some, is because we as teachers, and I have been guilty of this 1,000 times over. So, you know, it's like you teach something, the next day you come back and you go and you use it, and you're like, and the people are looking at you going, what are you talking about? And you go, we just did it yesterday. Why can't you remember? So you actually either blame the students or you blame yourself for being a bad teacher. But we need to shift away from this day-to-day look as how we plan learning a word. We have to see that it's a long-term thing. This space retrieval thing that we discussed, this spaced retrieval activities and the way we do it, this actually has shown, if you look at evidence-based learning, it has actually been shown to slow down the progress short-term of acquiring words, but it helps with long-term retention. So that's what we have to do. We have to stop looking at what can I achieve in one lesson, because doesn't work. We have to start thinking, what can I achieve over the course of several months? What can my students do better over the course of several months?
Thank you, Cristina. Yeah, I mean, you are absolutely right. But do you agree with me that this is something that teachers should actually be sensitized to? Because obviously planning for learning as opposed to planning for teaching is something that I mean, it's not just for vocabulary, but it's particularly important in the case of vocabulary teaching. So but now let me ask you a very simple question. I think it's a simple question and a very practical question.
I know you, Gabby.
No. It's kind of for the benefit of you know, all the people here today. How this planning for learning, okay, when it comes to recycling vocabulary, what do you think is the best practice? Would you dedicate a whole lesson to reviewing and recycling, or would you just have little slots? And at what point in the lesson, like share your experiences and your practices, and perhaps all the attendees could also share their practices and experiences in the chat. How often, what do you think, or when do you think is the best moment for recycling? And how long a recycling activity should be ideally?
Yeah, the idea is that these recycling activities should be very low stake. Because these are basically these are practice tests, and practice tests work the best when they are no stake or low stake. Because otherwise you get them stressed and they think it's oh my God, I have a whole lesson on it, I'm going to have a test, oh my God. So short burst. I mentioned doing it as homework, for example, doing something recycling. So instead of doing the next day the homework on what you did the day before, you do it you do it like 2 weeks or according to the space retrieval schedule. I believe that some of these activities, because they have an element of movement, you could do them as little warmers, you could do them a little bit as coolers, and remember, you know, sometimes in the middle of a 2-hour lesson, because some of us, you know, teach in centers where you give 2-hour lessons, sometimes it's just a question of, you know, when they come back from the break, they have like a 5-10 minute break, then you get them doing, and it's for them, it's a game. They're learning without noticing. They know this, they're learning, but it's a great way to infuse a change. Now, I know that the research on what is essentially you know, the, what do you call that, integrated, as in when you change skills a little bit, or you know, quite often within a lesson. I know research has shown that sometimes it hasn't been actually shown to work extremely well. It's moderate at best, but I find that a change of pace, even if it is just that, a change of pace is beneficial. So I would do little increments, you know, maybe every classes, but that's something that I would do. Gabby, before I forget, somebody mentioned something about pronunciation.
Oh, you see, it was, I didn't see that.
Something about, sorry, about, I can't remember. Somebody asked about whether or not pronunciation should be
Recycled.
yeah, it should be
recycling activities.
Yeah, can have vocab session pronunciation. So what they were talking about, that's something interesting, is that pronunciation has been shown that it's better to work on it more regularly than retrieval of meaning. So that's something also that we need to concern ourselves with. When Gabby, you were talking about what does it mean, you know, what does it mean to learn a word? Well, my question would be, what does it mean to know a word? And to know what is not just the definition, but also how to use it, but also the prawn. And the prawn, if as somebody was asking, I would do the prawn more often. You know, do some fun drilling, you know, all the girls, all the boys, whisper, shout, those kind of things, but you would do it more often. But again, little bursts. Don't do one lesson only. It raises the stakes, which means that people are less willing to just integrate it into their knowledge.
Thank you very much. Neil has posted work on meaning before seeing it. Yeah, well, yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Yeah. Now, you know, in your presentation, you had this activity with, you call it like a vocabulary bag, right? Now, I absolutely love it. I have to say, I don't have a vocabulary bag in my class, but it's about keeping track of vocabulary taught, right? So what I do is I do records of work after each session, and I'm very meticulous. I put every single new word that we had in class in my records of work. So then I have these words to design recycling activities. And my question for you now is, because I mean, we have to mention apps and technology. There's no way, you know, we can forget about it. So Neil mentioned ChatGPT, because, you know, I'm a firm believer in ChatGPT. I'm in love with ChatGPT, to be honest. I use it more and more and more every day, and for the same way Neil actually suggested earlier. So take the vocabulary that you've already taught and contextualize it differently. Use ChatGPT. Right, it is. I mean, it now with ChatGPT, it's so easy for us teachers to actually design recycling activities, not at a definition level, but sentence and context and meaning level. So
amazing.
yeah, so do you, and I'm going to test you in a minute, all of you, okay? Because as during the presentation, I designed an activity. It took me 1 minute. I used ChatGPT, and I would like you to maybe see if, okay, I don't know if I can copy this. No, I have to copy. Hold on, just give me 1 minute. Now, Salvatore has posted something.
Yes.
So
you
perhaps
mentioned that the answer
yeah?
to space repetition in the classroom is yes. Should be implemented by differentiated. The focus for feasibility is credible to make the students independent to find opportunity which they can use. Definitely. I agree, Salvatore. I mean, revising it on your own, and this is something that somebody mentioned also about how can I improve for my own IELTS exam. You can revise it on your own. Feedback has been shown to help with vocabulary acquisition, but it's much better to recycle vocabulary even without feedback than to do it, to not do it because you don't have feedback. So you can revise it on your own. And also something, I agree, Gabby, that technology is amazing. But something that has been also shown through research is that if people actually write the cards physically, with even if it's bilingual cards, absolutely fine. I love bilingual cards. I think they should be used way more often for learners. But if they write it physically, it helps retention. So that's something I want people to realize. ChatGPT is amazing. I'm using it for lesson creation. I'm using it for exercise creation. You know, when you have these, you know, when you want a beautiful contextualized tag, you know, a contextualized situation where you can have like gaps, so it's much easier for students to know which words to go in, and it takes you ages to write. Now with ChatGPT, done in a second. It's amazing. However, there's still a need sometimes to write something by hand. And this is where these word cards written by hand, they do help a little bit more with retention.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, Cristina, we all know that this is ChatGPT, and technology is not going to replace things. It's an addition, right? But I really want to share this this
We
activity.
want to be tested.
I don't know if you've ever seen this. Okay, this was an inspiration for me because I use it with my students. It's like a calendar. But there is a word or a name and 20 questions, okay, starting with I am, and then you have to kind of guess who or what it is. So what I often do is I take a word from the word that we have studied, and then I go to ChatGPT, okay, and this is what I get, okay? Now, I'm going to give you 1 minute or 2 minutes, and I want you to tell me what the secret word is. And this is a recycling activity. It's tongue-in-cheek, in a sense. I also get, that's it. So, so you see, I also get students to do it. So you can pick a word or you assign a word, okay, and then students can use ChatGPT to create, say, 3 sentences. It doesn't have to be 5. But the thing is that then students I expect students to process this information, okay, not just read it out, but process it, remember, and then people mingle. And this is how they review vocabulary from last week maybe, or from the day before, but in a fun way. But all I'm trying to say is, this is ChatGPT. That's technology. That's how it could be used. So it gives us so much scope, so many opportunities to design recycling activities.
Yes, I mean, the thing is that I know a lot of like teacher trainers and teachers even, they think they're like, well, listen, I'm trying my best. I'm following the course book. I don't have time for all this. Let's be honest. I just don't have time. Okay. When you talk to them about doing something new with listening, for reading, they're like, listen, I can barely go through my lesson. I have the director of studies down my back, breathing down my neck. I can't do this. But now with ChatGPT, I mean, obviously you still have to proofread this, but with ChatGPT, it has helped us. And I know a lot of people, I mean, on CELTA, they go, oh no, you should never use it. No, use it. It's amazing for paraphrasing. Nobody likes to paraphrase. Let's be honest. We can never find the right word. And Gabby and I, we're both, really high level, proficient in English. But I'm sorry, sometimes I just block. ChatGPT is a tool. That's what people have to understand. It's an amazing tool. Cannot replace us. It cannot replace teachers, but it is an amazing tool for teachers and students alike. And we should not be afraid of telling our students that, yes, you can use it. Obviously, don't ask them to do a lesson plan. They've tried, but don't try to do a lesson plan through ChatGPT, because we know we can smell ChatGPT a long far away. But it's amazing and it should be used. Gabby, thank you so much for this activity. It is really interesting. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, I really like it. It's a lot of fun each time we do it. It's just fun, I think. Anyway, Cristina, I had a couple of questions. I have a couple of questions left, but I think we can slowly wrap it up, because we've said a lot today. Now, before we go, anything that we would like to recycle or repeat? I mean, any like big takeaways for people who are listening to us today? What's your reflection?
My reflection is that people will forget, students will forget vocab, and it's not your fault. That's something you have to understand. It is not the teacher's fault. It's not because you're a bad teacher, and it's not because they're a bad student. It's just the way our memory works. Now, there's been a little bit of a problem with, you're right, Gabby, with the teacher training. We failed to explain that that's the way. But we have to re-empower the teachers to make them understand this is not your fault. There are ways we can deal with it. They are low prep. They will not ask you to do a lot. But what you have to understand is that it's natural. They will forget. But by forgetting, this will actually help them remember better if you catch it in time and you ask them to retrieve it. It will be a bit difficult, but this will actually create those pathways and your learners will learn. And that's the most, I think that's the most important thing.
Thank you ever so much.